Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Reconciliation as a Segue to Cultural Sustainability. Thank you all for joining us. A few little housekeeping things. The first part of today's session will go for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a quick break where you can put any chats for our any questions for our panel in the chat. And get up and get a cup of tea, those kinds of things. The Zoom software should have already muted you, but just in case it hasn't, if you could please just make sure that you're on mute today. Sometimes it doesn't do that when you're on a phone, and that can just be a little bit distracting or a bit tricky when we are hosting. And we ask that all conversation gets kept in the chat. It's just me today. Unfortunately, my colleague who was presenting the content first, Kirsty Rutherford, is no longer available to present. So I will be doing the first part of today's presentation. And it's basically just me on my own with IT today. So if you could please be patient when we have that 45-minute break at the end, I'll make sure to get to any questions that you might have. I just can't really toggle between the chat box and presenting. So thank you for your patience. So before we get started, if I can hear some sound, so if you can just make sure that you are muted, that would be really great. Thank you. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land that I am currently on and presenting from today is the land and country of the Kaurna people. And I just want to pay my respect to elders past and present who continue to hold a really deep connection to country and who have cared for, looked after, and had an ongoing connection with country for over 40,000 years. And so in today's kind of content, it's really important that we think about country and we really understand what that word means. And hopefully today, through the session, you'll get a better sense of kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about connection to country. So today's kind of session is going to focus on these main points. So essentially, what we're looking at more broadly is connecting reconciliation and cultural sustainability today. And the first part of the presentation is really going to look at how reconciliation is a segue to cultural sustainability. And then we're joined by two amazing people, Michael Watkins and Auntie Elaine Maguias, to give you a bit more of a conversational understanding really about what cultural sustainability is and how all of these things are interconnected. So today we'll be talking about country and culture. We'll be looking at terra nullius, the legacy of colonisation on culture and land management, cultural sustainability and environmental sustainability, Indigenous land management, then, understanding a bit about what reconciliation is and why, and how all of this connects to the 5 dimensions of reconciliation. So our kind of goal of today's webinar is to get you thinking outside the box when it comes to connection to country, and to hopefully move schools and early learning sites away from bush tucker gardens that are not done in things like partnership with Aboriginal people, understanding, I guess, the reciprocity that exists when it comes to country and people, and when it comes to culture and sustainability. So we're covering a lot in a really short period of time, but hopefully this will all make sense. It's also important to note, I should have introduced myself early and I forgot to do that because I get in a rhythm. But my name is Natalie Gentle. I am the Education Programs Manager at Reconciliation South Australia. And my background is early childhood education, predominantly working in inclusive practice and sustainability work. So this is really something that I'm quite interested in, and the wellbeing impacts that sustainability can have when we embed it within our work in education. But also reconciliation is so deeply tied to meaningful sustainability work. I'm I am a non-Aboriginal person. My background is British and Finnish, and it's important for me, I guess, to explain that I am a settler in Australia. And so I won't be talking today for Aboriginal people. I do not have the authority to talk about cultural practice, but what I will be doing is sharing videos and sharing information that is already out there when it comes to cultural sustainability. So amplifying the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are already working in this space today, and just giving you some places to start in your own journeys when it comes to learning about this. So that's a bit about what we'll be doing. Um, it's really important that we platform all of these organizations and don't speak for them. And so, the media that we'll go through today is really a gift for this work. There also will be some images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that may have deceased. And so, for those of you joining, just being mindful that that may happen. And that is, I guess, the downside of media, is that sometimes that people may pop up that we weren't expecting to see. So just be aware of that. Thank you. So now I'm just going to play some video from ABC, which is an acknowledgement of country, and a discussion about, I guess, cultural practice on country. And I just think it's a really great way of centering ourselves in this work today and thinking about how we connect with country.
Welcome to Wadawurrung country.
Traditionally, when people came onto Wurundjeri country, they had to wait on the boundary of our country to be welcomed, and a messenger, which is called a Wirigiri, was sent to that boundary to see what those people wanted. Then when the elders said they could come, they went through ceremony. So going through ceremony is about cleansing of spirit, cleansing your body, and so that when you sat down with the elders, you had no angst and you didn't come with any negativity or any fights or anything. And once you've been through ceremony, you're always welcome to sit at the fire.
Yukunda Nayania Baraya Nayania Manania 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 Yukunda Nayania Baraya Nayania Manania 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 Panel Gadangulang Panel Gadangulang Panel Gadangulang You can do Nayania Baria Nayania Manania 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 You can do Nayania Baria Nayania Manania 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 Bonel Gadangulang Bonel Gadangulang Bonel Gadangulang Twila Manipodnik Twila Wakanapadnik. The reason we are taking the leaf is that the leaf is connected to the tree is connected to the ground. The land is the oldest living thing in the world. Therefore, it has the knowledge and the wisdom of everything.
Whenever I'm coming back onto my country, I'll sing to myself something like, Jingity jingity, yukumbe jagun, which is just a hello, hello, my Yugumbe country. For us, it's just behaving in a way that's respectful.
Ya Palingana. Grandfathers, grandmothers, ancestors, we are here to honour you. Look after our visitors, please. We will be respectful. Walika.
When I come here, I like to introduce myself to country, say hello, and let country know who I am. The best way for me to do that is to take some of the earth and mix it with my sweat, and I sprinkle it into the river to let the river know that I'm here and to introduce myself to the land. You'll have a better day if you introduce yourself to country.
Mina tanapri meladina, lumi, luta, tina, pakanangini, na mina tanapri nina too. When you come in, you've got all this different energy from the places you've been in, and this smoke is almost like an opportunity for you to reground yourself and connect here.
I'm going to ask you just to put your hands on the rock, feel the warmth of it, let the land know that you're here. Because this rock anchors us to this country. Just let your mind empty and listen. It's not just wind blowing, it's the wind that's actually talking to you.
Such an incredible video and so beautiful. And for me, that video really demonstrates the reciprocity between people and country more than I could ever explain. And I love the just incredible diversity between different countries and how they acknowledge country and introduce themselves to country. And those, I guess, different cultural practices and songs and languages. And today, hopefully at the end of the session, what we'll really get is, I guess, that um, idea about how cultural sustainability is so much more than just land management and planting, bush foods, but is about this reciprocity and about language, and spirituality as much as it is about um, you know, how we are connected to country. So the next video that I'm going to show you is Uncle Bob Randall, who's a Yunkanjara elder from the Central Desert region of Australia. And this video is called The Land Owns Us. And this, I think, is just the most incredible way of showing you how, sorry, got lots of dogs barking near me. This is a really incredible video that can just show you how that reciprocity looks in action and how this looks from Uncle Bob's perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, we're here at Mutijula, right beside Uluru, the home of my ancestors. And it was in that area there, called Tempe Downs, where I came out. And that's why the police were brought in. And that's how I was taken, at that time by a police officer into Alice Spring. As like so many kids who then now can be referred to as the stolen generation. But of course, bush living was bush. You totally took most of your things from the land you're on. We just lived on the land as people of the land. To us, it was a natural way of being. Being part of all that there is was just the way you was. You didn't see anything any different from you. It was just a way of life that was inclusive of all that there is through life. Life is the binding and the connecting way the oneness is. If you're alive, you connect to everything else that is alive. But that oneness included everything that was around us, and you was raised with that teachings from a child upwards. The relationship and our relationship system for our people here. See, my people see land ownership as being totally different to the English way of ownership, because ours used to be really the land owns us, and it still is that to us. The land grows all of us up, and it really does. No human is older than the land itself. It just isn't. And no living marsupial is as old as the land itself. Everything that's been and gone with life in the flesh has died. But the land is still here. Part of land which has been handed down to you by your ancestors, we say the granny law, has given me my responsibility now that I'm grown up to care for my country, care for my mother, care for everything that is around me, the oneness, the completeness of that oneness, to be responsible in both caring, in every single way, which we call the kanyini, caring with unconditional love, with the responsibility. You feel that so well, that you feel good when you're in that space, and you kind of feel you're living with family when you include everything that is alive in that space. And that it's a huge space, and there's a lot of specimens of everything you could possibly imagine there with you. And then you grow up knowing that these are all your family. You can never feel lonely in that situation. You just can't. How can you when all around you is family members, from this ground up to all the trees around you, to the clouds hanging up around you, the birds flying by, the animals and reptiles that are just hidden in the shrub there for now, but can come out if they want to, hunt around for their little food, and then they can become food for us as well. It is a beautiful way of being. It doesn't push anyone out, but it brings everybody in. and a completeness of being who you are, where you are, is a really good feeling. And it's a beautiful feeling. I wouldn't exchange it for anything. That's why I'm here, right beside Uluru. I am so lucky.
Just another incredible video. And just, I mean, Uncle Bob's joy about living right next door to Uluru is pretty special. That laugh at the end. Um, I think that video is such a great way of explaining, I guess, our interconnectedness with country and why sustainability is both really complex and also it's kind of simple, really. Like we are here, and when we're no longer here, we will eventually become a part of this land, and we are part of that cycle, that part of that reciprocity. And the way in which this land has kind of been farmed and looked after. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into some work around colonization, is not working because that reciprocity isn't existing in the same way that it used to. And so there is a lot that can be learned and a lot that we can be taught when it comes to true care of country and looking after this land in a real meaningful way. So up on the screen now is just some words from Professor Irene Watson, who does currently live on Kaurna country. And I'll get you to have a read of that for a few minutes. But essentially, what Irene is talking about is the sense that um, these kind of relationships to land, to country, go far beyond owning and controlling your own piece of property. Um, so I'll get you to read that. And you can keep reading that while I'm talking. But this is really just about, I guess, the sense of trying to explain, particularly to those of us who are non-Aboriginal people who are settlers on this country and who've really understood land and land ownership as a fairly different kind of idea. And so this is our way, I think, of reading some of this. You can read Buried Alive. And I'll send out some reading list materials to those of you that are here. But this is like a really good way of hopefully building your understanding around like that relationship to land and to country, rather than something that is separate. It's something that's very much interconnected. Um, the connectedness the connectedness to land is the binding commonality between the hundreds of language groups and traditional custodians of Australia, of the land, but also is a bond that is shared between Indigenous people globally as well. It is basically when we speak of environment or of land, of sea, and of sky, we are speaking of culture. It's not possible to delineate between the environment and Indigenous life, as the two are bound by interconnectedness and deep spiritual bond. Thus, when we discuss sustainability in either the environmental or cultural context, it's important to acknowledge that for many Indigenous communities, they are one and the same thing. They are, as people, are the land and the land is them. So, and I guess that sentiment of the land owns us is really clear in that. The sustenance and well-being is dependent on the vitality of the land, and the vitality of the land is dependent on the well-being of those traditional knowledge bearers. Culture and country are inseparable, and so cultural sustainability is environmental sustainability. This is more than codependency, but is related to a oneness that was described by Uncle Bob. Environmental sustainability is dependent entirely on cultural sustainability and vice versa. So that's kind of a bit to get your head around. But essentially, it is, thinking about this interconnectedness is not even just in Australia, but a global phenomenon as well, and something that we can really learn from as we try to understand that. So this is an image that is taken from a book called The Biggest Estate on Earth by Bill Gammage. And it's, I guess, an interesting picture when we're looking at kind of land and we're looking at country. I guess the thing to note about this image, though, is that these are the type of images that were created by white colonizers when they arrived in Australia in 1788. And so it is, I guess, another warning just that some of the images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are a little bit one-dimensional and often kind of racist depictions, which is, I guess, part of the bigger project of colonization, is depicting groups of people in a certain way to justify decisions that were being made at that time. The thing that really, though, is important about this image is that when you look at this image, it's really well manicured, well tended, well looked after land. And so there's kind of a myth or a misunderstanding that when white colonizers first arrived in Australia, that they were met with these wild, unkempt, challenging kind of like country and land areas, and that now we know is not the case. So Bruce Pascoe also discusses this work in some of his books, and has noted that in the diaries of many colonizers, they saw things like cultural burning across the country as well, other land management practices. I did a training session called the Impact Training with the History Trust, which is really great. And one of the things that I learned about was something called killing fields, which were these like pieces of land that were manicured in a way that Aboriginal people could bring a kangaroo into one field and kill that kangaroo for their meal, and then shield the other kangaroos from seeing that, so that they could continue, I guess, to kind of lull them into those traps and have, a good healthy meal for dinner, and have that kind of endless supply of kangaroo for eating, while not disturbing or like, getting the other animals nervous. So these are like examples of land management, to, be able to eat, to be able to hunt, to be able to forage, the fruits, vegetables, and grasses, and all the things that were required. So I think it's just a really interesting thing to note, which a lot of you maybe already be aware of. In this 2012 book, Bill Gammage basically supports this thesis with exhaustive and compelling research from many primary resources of British colonizers that were arriving in 1788, and who wrote specifically that Australia was an unnatural landscape that had been carefully and systemically managed by its traditional owners to ensure that life was comfortable, that people had plenty to eat, had few hours of work each day, and had much more time for recreation. So again, these are points to kind of note that in 1788, the land was being managed very, very successfully and effectively. So I guess this is where some of the myths and some of the things that were taught in school or continue to be taught and continue to be shared are myths and are untrue. So white colonizers arrived in 1788, and those kind of truths that come from books from like Bill Gammage and Bruce Pascoe, and from stories from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders across Australia. Those truths were fast replaced with myths, lies, and fallacies, really for one reason, which was to justify the stealing of land and being able to then, create their own land ownership, including environmental lies that could denounce the occupation of the land and the abundant care that had been invested in it. And the first kind of, and the most major lie, which many of you are more than aware of, I'm sure, is terra nullius. So colonization, European settlers founded, like terra nullius is the foundational lie that essentially allowed the justification of occupation and state of land. And this kind of 1788, while it feels like a really long time ago in the scheme of things, is, and particularly in how long Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been here, is a blip, is a very small amount of time. But it is, I guess, important to, I guess, it's unsurprising that with all of this deep-seated mythology and lies around terra nullius, around the fact that the land wasn't managed, etc., that our mainstream society continues to dismiss that knowledge and the relationship that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have with country. And that is because this erasure has been central to maintaining those lies and maintaining, the legitimizing that colonization project. But I think the thing to really note is that the lies, the falsification of information that was shared, it's important to know that that was deliberate and that it was divisive, and that it has absolutely benefited one group while another group has experienced loss as a result. And so, these are kind of things to think about, is why in, the last few years, there's been a sudden kind of rush into considering things like cultural practices. And it's because for so long, those cultural land practices and connection to country have been dismissed. And so it's just, I think, really important to understand that that is not the case, that these practices have always existed, and that, there's a lot now that we can learn from. So that's just a little bit of information. I won't go into too much detail because I don't have a huge amount of time for all of this. But essentially, what I've kind of already said is these kind of, this justification is to erase culture, to erase language. And we know from history, we know that as part of colonization, people were not allowed to speak their own languages, which is part of cultural sustainability, that it was undermining knowledge and culture because the colonizers wanted to put Aboriginal people, they wanted those people to be viewed as, not contributors to the country, so that they could, justify saviorism and building land on those properties and bringing in their own laws and all of that kind of stuff that we know about. My favorite thing about these dot points, though, is that nature reveals the lies. Western ways of land management have not been working, and we can learn a lot from Aboriginal and Torres Strait ways, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of being and doing and connecting with the land. So this is a picture of Victor Stephenson, and if you don't know who he is, there is a really incredible organization called the Fire Sticks Alliance, and we'll probably quote a bit more from that. But I just think this is a great image, that, being on land for 40,000 plus years without destroying it, now that's an achievement. And that is something that we need to really learn from and think about. So I just wanted to share some other people who are making kind of, um, doing a lot of work in this space. So as we quoted before, Professor Irene Watson. So I just wanted to show you an image of her and also just give you a bit more information so that you can do your own research. But she has a long history in examining the legacy of colonialism and the enduring doctrine of terra nullius in this country. So that is something that I really would implore you to have a read of. She does it a lot more justice than I can do in 45 minutes. So, and then also Professor Marcia Langton um, has, she's leading in a lot of specific areas around engagement, cultural collection, and heritage issues, and is also looking at Indigenous teaching and research activities at the University of Melbourne, particularly through the Nanga project. What's important about Professor Marcia Langton to just mention is that she is really clear that cultural traditions and practices have never stopped, which is something else that's really important to talk about, is that we often talk about cultural ways of doing things as something that is in the past. And I actually think we'll have a great conversation about that with our panel. But there's often kind of conversations where we call tools artifacts, where we talk about cultural ways of doing as historical and in the past, but we know that traditional methods of land management are still used in Arnhem Land at the top end of Australia. Also, I think a lot around Darwin, and those practices are now being reignited, and I guess more emphasis is being put on them in other states as well. So I think it's just important, I guess, to acknowledge that there is success in this continuity of traditional practice, but also that it is like a continued living practice that is not something that went away, and it's not something that people stopped doing because it wasn't successful. If it had stopped in certain states, it was because there was a stop. It was put to a stop by colonization rather than by an active retreat around processes, or that the processes were not working anymore. That hopefully that makes sense. But we need to, I think, be really mindful about how we talk about Aboriginal culture, because it is persistent and continued and living and breathing today, not just something that we talk about pre-colonization as existing. It continues today. So that's Victor Stephenson again from the Fire Sticks Alliance, and I just think that that is a really great place for you to start your learning journey around this work as well. So Victor's work focuses on the healing and regenerative nature of cultural burning. He says that he was lucky to be given this ancestral knowledge when he moved to Laura in his late teens by two elders who entrusted him with the responsibility of holding and sharing this knowledge to heal country. Since then, Victor has worked tirelessly to advocate around the importance of fire to country and its role in maintaining ecosystems. And so I just want to now play you a video that kind of explains some of this a bit further.
This is putting in what old people have done for so long, understanding country, knowing how to read country, knowing what country needs, understanding the identity of country and all its values. That's the way Aboriginal people have been a part of evolving this landscape. People have evolved with country. And when the European came here, they saw a beautiful country, they saw old trees, beautiful landscapes. And the old people maintained that for generations and generations and generations. And so now it's a healing phase for us. It's bringing back that identity, and there's a lot of work to do. So a whole new leaf needs to happen. And the country's telling us that. The reports tell us that, and the people tell us that from community. And so this is where the turning point needs to happen, not just environmentally and the work on the country, but also socially, how we get all the agencies working and supporting each other, including private landholders, mining companies, forestries, universities. All of that needs to fall under the one thing, and that is people and country, and stepping on the stepping stones that we've missed in the past. And the more that we demonstrate that interconnectedness, and the more that we get people working together, then the brighter the future will be, and especially for our younger generations, because this sort of work needs to happen forever. And if we're going to reverse the damage that's done to this country, and if we're going to bring back the old growth forests, and if we're going to bring back one of the oldest cultures in the world to be strong in every part of this country, then we all need to work together. And so it's really crucial now today that all agencies are working together, from national parks, you name it, everyone. They all have to come to the round table and support region by region by putting people back on country, because that's what's missing, people. The right people looking after the land and putting people back onto country the way it always has been for thousands of years. The tireless words that come from our elders stating the problems if we don't look after our land through thousands of years of experience. And that's what we aim for into the future. People, country and environment evolving again to a strong, healthy culture into the future. And all I can say is that when the young people are exposed to this and they learn this knowledge, they want to throw their lives at it. So it's up to us now, all us older ones and every living person that's alive today, regardless of your age, that we are the turning point, and the turning point for generations to come to bring this country back to health, the healthy way it should be, and the opportunities that come from that as well.
So I think something that's just really important to note, and an interesting fact, is that the first cultural burn in a capital city post-colonization was conducted here on Ghana Yurta in 2021 under Victor's guidance and supported by Green Adelaide as well. And so I think that that is, you know, a really important milestone, and I guess the evidence of how important this continued cultural practice can be, and how successful it can be as well. So I'm just going to skip the slides on Indigenous land management, but I might just send that information through to you after, but I'm just running out of time before we can have a little break and some questions. But if you just have a look here, I think it's important to also understand that this is part of the rights of Indigenous peoples. So there is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and you can see, you know, that it's recognizing that respect for Indigenous knowledge, cultures and traditional practices contributes to sustainable and equitable development and proper management of the environment. And so we have that really embedded and encoded into humanitarian law as human rights. If you haven't read the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we can definitely share a copy with you after today's session. It is so worthwhile from an education perspective as well as from a sustainability perspective. You can see with some of those articles that there are some really specific rights about the management of land, of conservation, you know, and these are very much embedded in native title as well, and people being able to hunt on their own country, etc. So worthwhile reading. So this also just gives you just a little bit more information that recognizing that respect for Indigenous knowledge, cultures and traditional practices contributes to sustainable and equitable development and proper management of the environment. So you can see, like, when we focus on cultural sustainability and culture, we look at values, perspective, stewardship, heritage, history, identity, and how important all of these things are. So, in terms of reconciliation, then, as a segue to cultural sustainability, Indigenous led restoration of Indigenous lands and land based knowledges and stewardship systems are a critical part of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples globally, which means when it comes to reconciliation, that these kind of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander led initiatives, sovereignty is really a key part of reconciliation. It comes from co-design processes. It comes from a willingness to learn and be a part of that. So reconciliation, for those of you who haven't been to one of my webinars before, Reconciliation SA are a not-for-profit, member-based and community-led organisation. And then in terms of reconciliation, we work within the 5 dimensions of reconciliation. So, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute, but reconciliation essentially at its core is about building respectful relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the broader South Australian community for the benefit of everybody. It's an ongoing journey for all of us and a process underpinned in values that define an inclusive and respectful society. So when we're looking at building relationships, we look at reciprocity, and what that means is that we work together and in partnership and we learn from each other. And so it makes total sense that reconciliation can be your gateway into thinking about cultural sustainability and how you can consider those cultural practices within your education environments or your workplaces. So I've said that already. So why reconciliation? Reconciliation is a process to bring people together, to recognise the truth of colonial impact and to acknowledge and address the ongoing impacts of that colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, culture and identity. I think as well, it is also very much work that needs to be done by non-Aboriginal people and predominantly white people in partnership with Aboriginal people, rather than being always led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We see often in workplaces and schools that Aboriginal people are put in charge, given responsibility to do reconciliation work entirely. And the thing about this work is that it is a collaborative effort and everybody participates. Reconciliation is everybody's business. And so when we're talking about this work, we really need it to be clear that it is shared effort, that it is not something that you can just kind of handball off to one staff member, because that is really, really difficult and burdening work. And the colonial load of that is really significant. And so when we're talking about reconciliation, we need to talk about that as really true partnerships and working together. So I'm going to skip this activity, but maybe I'll send you through, there's a Narragawnawali resource on this that you can do, but this is a really great way of understanding reconciliation from head, heart, and hand. So head is knowledge, heart is feeling, and hand is action. And so those are some, I guess, some really good considerations to make when you're thinking about cultural sustainability and reconciliation and sustainability. How are you thinking about knowledge as well as feelings, as well as the actions that you can take in that space? So these are the 5 dimensions of reconciliation. I'm not going to go through them in a huge amount of depth because I've spoken to them many times. You can go back on an old webinar, or you can have a look on the Reconciliation Australia website for more information on these. But essentially, what we want to kind of get to the core of is that anti-racism practice sits across all of this work. And so anti-racism is about decolonisation and decentering that, colonial ways of doing things and recentering Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of doing things. So you can see kind of here that when we look across these 5 dimensions of reconciliation, there's a process of unlearning and relearning that we need to do as non-Aboriginal people. And that also includes an anti-racism and decolonization lens. And so when it comes to, I guess, cultural sustainability and how reconciliation leads us there, there's a lot of different things within this. So that historical acceptance of understanding that there were processes that intentionally removed cultural practice in our society. Institutional integrity is about thinking about, well, when it comes to our systems and how we look after the planet, how can we embed culture within those processes, and how can we make sure that our government systems, all the way down to, you know, how we keep the grounds of our schools and early learning sites have cultural sustainability embedded through them. And so like a simple way of that is, how are you actually doing cultural sustainability if you're having a bush tucker garden? So if you're planting bush foods, are you just putting them in your garden? Are you working collaboratively with traditional owners? Do you understand what the plants are? Are you looking after them? Or are you planting a garden that isn't set up for success, and the children or students in your site watch that garden wilt away and die? So, like, thinking about how do we make sure that cultural sustainability is one of the pillars when we're doing sustainability work within our sites, so that we're thinking about those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of doing things, which is community led and collaborative and reciprocal, rather than something that's just a one off or that we haven't deeply thought about. So, this is just a bit more what I spoke about already, is where you decenter that colonial culture and knowledge, that white culture and knowledge, and you recenter Indigenous knowledge and culture within all of those processes. So it's really, again, about that reciprocity, those race relations, and how we relate to each other, how we relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and how we work in ways that are community-led, collaborative, and partnerships. I've seen this work like do incredibly well, particularly in early learning sites, when kindergartens have like an elder in residence or an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander elder or traditional owner who is working with their site ongoing and can support their children to understand how different plants are used, how to walk on country, how to acknowledge country, how language is so much a part of acknowledging country, and when, you know, traditional owners are doing their welcome to country and those kinds of things. You know, I guess like understanding the importance of all of that and having those relationships is going to be a really big key for you to be successful and for you to make this work have really, like, to be meaningful, to have meaning within your site, as opposed to something that you kind of like shake your head out or cringe about in a year's time because it just didn't work, because you maybe didn't think about it deeply enough. Um, I'm just going to skip that video. So on Reconciliation Australia, there's some great interviews with Victor Stephenson. I'm just going to skip through some of these. You can also do some work around anti-racism and decolonizing your practice if you look at our Education Action and Change resource. I'll share the link for that if you haven't downloaded it. It's free, and that is more about anti-racism, but definitely is a good starting point for thinking about decentering like colonial knowledge and moving towards more shared community knowledge and collective knowledge. I'll just put this up for a second. If you have not signed up for our education newsletter, I really implore that you get your phone out and use that QR code. It takes you to a sign up form, and then you'll get, we only send them quarterly, but they will just give you an overview of when we're doing webinars or when we're doing other free workshops. And so I always make sure to just kind of share that one with everybody, because it is a good place to start with us. If you're not sure where to next, you'll find out about future work that we're doing as well. And then finally, for those of you that are from schools or early learning sites, we have recently launched a new education membership, which is site-wide, and is designed for anybody working in the education system from early childhood up to secondary schools, posh, long daycare, family daycare, if that's of interest. It gives you access to communities of practice sessions and also drop-in sessions for our ongoing work around reconciliation action plans or other questions you might have about implementing those. And we also have an e-resource library, so you can access some resources that we've developed, some downloadable PDFs. So the final thing, just I guess to land on, is some potential future resources that you might want to look at. So looking after country with fire, we did a book review of that race in one of our recent education newsletters. Dark Emu, and then there's a children's book of that as well, a really great. Any of these resources up here are just going to give you like a good sense of what's going on, and how to kind of build your capacity around cultural sustainability. So that's it from me. You'll have to excuse me fumbling over my words today. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with my brain, but I seem to be stumbling more than normal, so maybe I'm a bit overtired. So what we're going to do now is just take a quick pause here, for you to hop up, get a cup of tea, and then we'll come back for our panel. So I will just get our panel members organised, and any questions that you may have either about that presentation or for our panel members, pop them in the chat and we will try to get to them. Anybody's welcome to kind of ask a question, and you can ask those questions during the panel as well. But, we have a very limited amount of time with our panelists, and we'll see how we go. In the meantime, I'm just going to turn myself off for a sec, get some things organised, and we'll be back in 5. Thanks. Hi, Michael.
Hi, how's it going?
Sorry, we're just doing a quick 5-minute break while I wait because Annie Lane's coming as well. But well, I hope she is. And nothing's come up.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry for my delayed responses to you today. It's like that time of year.
Nah, true. Nah, no worries at all. Oh,
We'll
good.
get started in a minute if you want to get like a cup of tea or something.
Oh, easy. No, no, all
Yeah,
good. Got my water in that
thanks.
here, so
Good.
yeah.
It's my dog.
Mine might go off too. It's starting to hear some thunder in the background.
Oh no. Oh, that's gonna make him crazy. Um, he's not happy about being put outside today, but he always interrupts my webinars.
Yes. Begging for attention, eh?
Yeah. I'll just quickly text, and if not, we'll just get started, and then when she pops on. All right. I might just I'll get started because I know that we're on a time frame, and I'll keep an eye out to see if our other, guest comes online, but otherwise no pressure, Michael. But you'll be on your own. Um
Yeah, no, no,
so
all good.
thanks. So thank you everybody. Hopefully you're all back from getting your cups of tea and having a quick leg stretch. So we'll just pop into the second half of our webinar now, which is a bit more of a conversation about what this work can look like in practice, and how we can kind of connect children and young people to sustainability in meaningful ways. I might just start, Michael, by getting you to do an introduction of yourself and the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, no, of course. So I guess first of all, thanks for inviting me to come and be part of this discussion. I'm over here on Ghana Yota and Ghana country around Adelaide. So yeah, obviously my name's Michael Watkins. So I come from mixed background. I got Italian immigrants on my mum's side and dad's side, Modbury Jingly mob up from the Northern Territory there, and sort of spent a lot of that family around Alice and Darwin up around there. But born and raised down here in Adelaide, and I guess had a fortunate education opportunity growing up, and it's what Nana and Dad and the rest of them doing the hard yards, going to being the first people in the family to go to uni, which allowed me to go to university and end up in this role I'm in now, which is a lecturer in Aboriginal allied health, and do a little bit of teaching, but more so engaging in research space. I got a nutrition food science background. Growing up, like a lot of you were probably always curious about, bush foods and their importance, nutritional properties and that. So I think that's what sort of naturally led me to this space. And what's so great, I think, about my role now, and the what I find really interesting about research has been able to work alongside and for Aboriginal communities or organisations, in responding to their self-determined needs or priorities, whatever that might be. If it's something in the lab or out in the communities, around bush foods gardens, whatever it might be. So and I work at the University of South Australia's Department of Rural Health now. So yeah, it's a bit, I guess, quick little overview of my background there.
Thanks, Michael. And I think it's really interesting because one of the kind of motivations initially for organising this webinar is we have a grants program at Reconciliation SA, and a lot of sites put in applications for bush tucker gardens,
Yep.
getting that set up. But what we're, I guess, trying to support sites to learn about is, I guess, how to deepen that work with things like bush foods. And I guess you'll be able to provide some really interesting context about some of that, even the nutritional value, the well-being that you see with the youth that you work with and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I might also just introduce, I've seen Annie Lane's popped in now. I've pinned her, but maybe she's shy and doesn't want her camera on. I did see her pop up. Is your Zoom working, Auntie Elaine? It may not be. Well, I'll just leave her to it just for a sec. We always have IT issues with Zoom. So I'll get her to do an introduction when she has a moment to do so. Um, so I might just go on then to while we're still doing introductions, maybe it would be good, Michael, to talk a little bit about the research and, well, is it action research? Is that what you would call it through the uni?
Yeah, I think most appropriately probably aligns with that sort of framework. Yeah. So yeah, I guess look, the main research project we've got going on at the moment is it's an MRFF Indigenous Health grant funded project with two education sites as our partners. What's really important about this, most significant, I think, about this project was that the relationships that came into this sort of the research project side of it existed prior to that, So it was just us in the community up in Whyalla there that knew each other, might have worked alongside each other, knew each other outside of work capacity. And the community got together and some of the Aboriginal women up there saying, we want bush foods garden, and access to bush foods for our young people for that intergenerational knowledge transfer, and that they had concerns that the young people and the young Aboriginal people in the community didn't have enough opportunity or at all the opportunity to learn about culture through bush foods or just about bush foods more generally. So we sort of set it up. We did some initial yarning a couple of years ago. We're able to do another sort of action research phase around designing and developing some of those tools and how we would capture that. And I'm sure all of you here can appreciate how difficult it is to capture culture, cultural health and well-being, cultural connectedness, qualitatively through yarn and that, is great as well, but also from a I wanted to make sure that this project spoke to the rigor of university research as well. So that's why we added in a quantitative element, so a survey tool, which again, what I was just saying, really hard to define that down to, a couple of questions, and responding to those, especially for young people. But I wanted to give it a go anyway. And that led us to keep building up the project, to be successful in this grant now, which is it's a 2-year project, so it's gone pretty quick, and we're just wrapping up some data analysis now. So I'll be back up in Whyalla from tomorrow, actually, having some yarns with some young people to capture their experience about what they got out from the, from the program. There's a few things with it as well, from my, I guess, perspective or interpretation, where I hear like the Whyalla community, the Bungala country there with Bungala families and communities, but also a number of other language and cultural groups that live in the town now that might have been brought up there or moved there, and that's something that, the community, our reference group, Bungala elders are working with, wanted it to reflect not just, Bungala bush food plants and knowledges, but reflect the general sort of arid region of South Australia, different cultural groups, where it be Wurrungu or, Western Desert Mob or up there in the Flinders, and I guess what we've been doing over this year, partnership with the school sites, probably isn't anything new, like you were saying, Natalie, like bush food gardens are around in other schools and communities, planting, propagating, learning about their uses, whether that's for cooking, cultural reasons, whatever it might be. I think we just wanted to kind of package that all together and hopefully have this unique evaluation framework around it to ask the question around what role do bush foods play in cultural connectedness and cultural health and well-being for Aboriginal young people. Because there's a number of different I guess, yeah, everyone's probably familiar, Aboriginal young people are, faced with a variety of challenges, opportunities, and barriers to learn about bush foods and plants. Access to country is a big important one. We might have a lot of young Aboriginal people still, really connected and growing up with a lot of that plant knowledge, whereas others might not have that same opportunity to as well. There's a lot of great academic literature out there, as well as, elders and all sorts of people out in the community saying it, that culture is good for health and well-being. And so we're hoping that our project will contribute to a bit of that story, and hopefully share it across like the education sector as well, around, here's another way, if you're not already, that you can incorporate Aboriginal knowledges, Aboriginal pedagogy into the education system, but also here's what it's doing for young kids, And I'll just add on, Natalie, if you don't mind, something that's really fueled me is two sort of things I've heard over my time the last couple of years in another community, in another site, and I won't say who or where, but this I was running like a sort of a workshop to promote, nutrition and food science as a university pathway. And this one young Aboriginal kid just couldn't stop talking to me about, going out bush, these plants, that plant, or, hey, did you know the story for this part of the river, means this as well? And I interpreted that as, where's this coming from? Is there not a culturally safe or responsive education environment around this young fella to fuel and share that within the school environment? I don't know, I could be off, but that's something that really resonated with me. And I don't want to read too much into it, but another time as well, this another young person was telling me about how he loves, just heading out, they're in a remote school, and right near the school, there's a whole bunch of quandong trees. You'd have different names for them, Santala, Macuminatum. And, then the teacher sort of butted in and said, yeah, I can't, I keep telling him, stop eating it, get back into class. And I was thinking, that just doesn't sit right with me. Maybe he's, being disruptive or not sitting down doing his work, but don't get in the way of engaging with culture through that, and that's kind of two examples that's really, I don't know, stuck with me and that I've had to think over. And I guess it's fueled a bit of this work we're doing now. So, yeah, hopefully that sets the scene a bit for you anyway.
Oh, good. That's great. And I think so before you joined us, we played a few videos. One of them was from Victor Stephenson from Fire Sticks Alliance, and he talks about like once kids get engaged in this work, like when they get engaged in any kind of sustainability connection to culture and country, they just want to throw themselves into it. And so I guess what we try to do at Reconciliation SA is build the teaching workforce that exists there into being more culturally responsive to those cultural needs that Aboriginal children need met, but also I guess the fact that it also can transcend that, because all of our kids in schools are going to get benefit from engaging in sustainability and learning a bit more about country, both for that reciprocity, but also, I mean, like bush food is just better for us. I saw like a video of Bruce Pascoe digging up yams, and he said that these tiny little yams have like 50 times more nutrients than a potato does, because our soil's made for it. So
Yes.
Annie Elaine, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Hello.
Sorry. I just wasn't sure if you were having some problems with your connection. Do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and let people know who you are?
Hey everybody, Namani you mob. My name's Elaine Maguire. I'm a Ghana Narunga woman. I've worked in education for about 13 and a half years. Recently left it earlier than what I'd hoped to, but nevertheless I've left it, and now I'm getting into lots of cultural work and building connections and networking and getting out into the community and doing a lot more. That about sums me up, Nat.
I don't think it really does. I think that's quite a short summary. So I might throw a question then to you, Annie Elaine, to start with. So what does cultural sustainability as a concept mean to you?
Cultural sustainability as a concept.
Yeah,
Well,
so like what is that? What's your interpretation of cultural sustainability as opposed to like environmentalist sustainability?
cultural sustainability, I've been talking a lot about this in my welcomes lately, and pull me up if I'm off track, Nat, but cultural sustainability is ensuring that, we have received a cultural inheritance from our elders, whether that be language, bush tucker, going out on country, whatever it is, continuing to practice what we've been given, what's been shared with us, so that the kids that come behind us, the generations that follow, can continue to practice culture in some way. And it's a cultural inheritance that we have to protect and pass on to the next generations.
I love that. That's such a great way of, I think, summarizing, like, really when it comes down to it, it's what you do with that inheritance as well, and how we can support those around us to also be able to continue to practice that and use that inheritance.
If we don't share and connect and pass on, everything that's been given to us will be lost.
Mm.
We have to give these young kids an opportunity to move forward, continue 2,600 generations of culture.
Mm.
My answers are short and sweet, don't you, Nat?
No, but my processing time is longer. So, do you have anything to add to that, Michael, around like what do you think of when you think of cultural sustainability?
Yeah, I'm just thinking what Auntie Elaine was saying. There's a number of plants which I hear are endangered, rare, due to things like mining, Western agricultural practices, and I think even just by encouraging, you to plant some bush food plants or some Australian native plants, even in your backyard or on your front porch, is a way to continue that or contribute to that cultural sustainability, I guess. And even just through what we've done up in Wales with this bush foods project is just building the knowledge base of Aboriginal young people that we're working with there. Like I said, some know a whole bunch of different plants and they're local Aboriginal language names for them. Others might only be learning about some for the first time. And so I think for even something like that, is I would hope is contributing to that cultural sustainability, because along with that comes might be the stories along with it as well, or what those plants meaning, or the uses of them as well. And I guess in my space, like working for the university as well as new modern technologies and ways of contributing to that cultural sustainability as well, whether it's, through some of the work we've done as, supporting an Aboriginal business, which, might put out their own bush food tea blend or, product with bush foods in it as well. That's a way to keep those plants and those food items present, in this new ever-changing world, I guess. So, yeah, some of the things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, we in one of our previous education newsletters, we shared the Warndu, the cooking companion, as like a tool that educators and teachers can use, because that's such a brilliant way of just incorporating like Indigenous plants and fruits and whatever you can kind of find into your cooking. And so we have what do we have growing in my garden? We've got salt bush, which is like grows like a weed because we live near the coast, and we have Gallica and um oh, I've forgotten the name of it, but also a type of spinach, and we cook all the time with those foods, and they just like and they're in abundance. It's really amazing, just simple ways that can connect you to country. So I think Arnie Elaine kind of touched on this, so I just want to expand on it. Maybe I'll start with you again, Arnie Elaine. But Um, what are the benefits of working of children and young people, sorry, engaging in these like cultural practices and culture, I guess cultural sustainability? Um, like why should they be doing it, and what are the benefits to kids?
Because our kids have always done it. And it's also building that sense of pride and connection with whoever their mob is. It's maintaining our knowledges, it's sharing, and it's given these kids, I can talk about the kids because I've worked with them in school, a sense of pride and identity, a sense of belonging to country, or yeah, and it empowers them. Knowledge empowers them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you got to hear, but Michael was sharing a couple of stories of I guess students that he's worked with and the engagement that they have in like picking fruits from a quandong tree, and like the stories that they knew from some of their like cultural practice, and how that I guess like puts a sparkle in their eye. Like it's
Yeah,
so
I was listening to what he was saying about the kid going out to the condom tree, and I could see the kid in my head, standing there proud, because how many kids in his classroom even know that? That's cultural knowledge that he understands, and that connects him with country, people, culture. That's his simplistic way of practicing his culture. And embedding that in his life, he'll carry that forever. He'll tell his kids about the stories of picking condoms and eating them outside the classroom. It's, yeah, it ignites a passion in them.
It's funny when you talk about quandongs, because for me, one of the first times I ever tried quandong jam was actually a Ghana elder brought a jar of it for me to try, and talked to me about the process of like picking the quandongs and keeping the seeds and gifting them to his kids, because they would then clean them all up and use them to make earrings and jewelry, and like again like those processes where like particularly a non-Aboriginal person might look at that tree and just see it as a fruit tree. But there are kids and there are people like working on Ghana country or wherever they might be, that view that tree as like an abundant resource with so many uses as well. And we just miss opportunities to talk to children about that knowledge when we're, I guess, trying to manage behavior rather than think about, taking their lead, I guess.
And just, the simple quandong tree, it can be introduced in education in so many ways, when it season, what season it grows, and then you talk about the seasons and how the fruit is used, and like you said, the seeds. There's so much to build. It's not just a tree, it's far more in culture.
So Michael, you may have like some more to add to this, I guess, in terms of the benefits for children and young people. Like what have you learned so far with when it comes to like your well-being research?
Yeah, well, we're just collecting that up sort of as we speak, and the rest of this week. So I'm really, really keen to see what it tells us. I think obviously the qualitative, like the yarning data that we'll get back will be a lot stronger than just the numbers, which just makes sense when you're working, with mob and that. But what I've been hearing, along the way is that, just that learning outside of the classroom, when we're planting plants out the front of the school or over in the bush foods garden, just walking around and being out there as well, we're noticing and observing different behaviors, better engagement, even some, just the other week we were there with a couple of the younger kids and a couple of the, older students, like year 5s and 6s, and just the, what do you call it, like the mentoring and the supporting that happens when we're planting some plants. It's just amazing to see that naturally unfold, And I guess going back to just what I said before, like I think like young people are so interested to learn about it. It just needs a bit of a different environment. And I've definitely noticed, you know, if I've been in the classroom with the screen talking about bush foods, nutrition properties, and aligning that with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, you know, still interested, but it's still that classroom setting and that environment versus if I'm outside with them, you know, showing them some of the plants, yarning with them or planting some plants, just that different engagement. It's, you know, it's different to being out on country, but I guess what we're arguing is that, you know, being out in the bush foods garden outside amongst, you know, native plants, bush food plants, what role does that play, you know, and how do young people interpret and feel when they're outside there, you know? And I guess from a research perspective too, what's really driven us to this work is that, you know, not everything has to be captured in research, but sounds like, you know, what Annie Elaine was saying, and I'm sure a lot of people here today have heard and seen a lot of great things happening along the way or engagement or outcomes, but we're not seeing that reflected in the literature, you know, and that's a large source of information that I have to draw from. And so it's, you know, there are a lot of ethical considerations when we're putting this project up through various ethics committees, and rightfully so. But we wanted to work through that to capture, you know, not only are Aboriginal voices still not well represented in academic literature, young people's aren't, and then particularly young Aboriginal people. So I'm really excited to, yeah, once we get that, especially that qualitative data, you know, have a yarn with the young people, and, you know, hear some of their experiences with the program, and then share that, not only just amongst, you know, the academic community, of course, but other schools, Aboriginal communities and groups, you know, to have that documented down, to be able to share out on various platforms about, you know, here's what they get out of it as well. And because I just, yeah, hear lots of great work going on, but it's just, yeah, I can't see it reflected enough anyway in you know, literature or what we see online just yet.
Yeah, we when I was working in early childhood, we did a lot of work about reconnecting just our kindy age children to being more in outdoor spaces, because like so many children and young people are spending so much more time indoors. And my background is has been in inclusive education, so working with children who have disabilities and neurodivergent children. We also see the benefits of, again, being on country, shoes off, touching land, touching soil, participating in like a reciprocal way, as having so many health benefits. Changes to general like negative and more antisocial behavior doesn't happen in those spaces. So it's like really worthwhile. And I mean, obviously all those things that Annie Elaine said around like identity and like empowering them, like it's so important for kids to feel that way when they're at school. So I guess this is a tricky question, but when we're looking at schools and early learning sites, how would a site engage in sustainable practices then that are meaningful? I wonder, Annie Elaine, what you think about what would you say to teachers and educators about engaging in sustainability and culture in meaningful ways?
When you can, take the kids outside. You know, it's not only just being outside. A classroom is restrictive, yeah? It's cold. No matter how many posters and everything's up, it's still got 4 walls and a door. Outside, it's not only just being outside, but it's the sounds and it's the breeze and it's the smells. Kids are going to be more open to learning. And I've seen when kids have mucked up in class just so that I can go and get them and take them outside. Yeah?
Yeah.
Lessons that can be easily taught and structured to be outside in that space.
What about you, Michael? What do you think around sites engaging in sustainability?
Well, I think what Arnie Elaine said, like, don't overcomplicate it. That's just such a great response, and it makes so much sense. I don't come from an education background. This project's still really new, but it really resonates with what I'm seeing and hearing, especially with, that inclusive learning and teaching for some young people and what they're faced with, and just those different methods and regulation that they need to thrive within I would say restrictive, Western education system bound by the four walls, eh? And I was just thinking about a couple of school sites I've been to. Usually there's at least some form of, eucalyptus tree around, or mallee tree, whatever, which has those beautiful smelling leaves, so that's just at least one plant that should be around that you can go out and engage with and learn from, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think, like I said, I don't come from an education background, but from the health discipline perspective at my university, I'm seeing recent school leavers who come through our allied health programs that have a different baseline of like Aboriginal cultural awareness and respect, which I hope is a reflection upon their, education in high school. And I would hope starting to see a similar trend of, recent graduates from, early childhood, middle primary, high school teachers, education graduates too as well. Hopefully then are more willing, prepared, have the capabilities to, support Aboriginal young people in that school environment through, just what Arnie Elaine was saying.
In the presentation that we did before, Auntie Elaine, we were talking about, there were some quotes from Marcia Langton around the fact that cultural ways of connecting to country and sustainability have always existed and continue to exist. And when I was reading that quote, I thought of you, and I wondered if you just wanted to comment on, I guess, the idea of cultural practices being in the past when we know that they're continued, and your thoughts on that.
Well, look out, and that don't get me started. So yeah, in schools they talk about Aboriginal culture as if it is in the past, and sometimes they pull themselves up and talk about it happening now. But the most common one is they talk about artifacts. No, they're not artifacts. Artifacts are in the museum. They're tools, because sometime in Australia, there's people still using those tools. The language that teachers, the language that teachers use to talk about culture is detrimental to the kids in the classroom, especially to the Aboriginal kids, because it's sending a message that they're talking about things that might have happened in the past that they're not taking into account. Like they talk about ceremonies and things like that, but we still have our modern day ceremonies. We still have the fishing, when we go over to York Peninsula for the butterfish competition, we still have our celebrations are different, they've changed, that we have evolved because we're no longer the dominant culture. We've had to evolve to fit in. So we've got our netball competitions and our football competitions. They're all cultural events. And teachers don't understand that. They think a cultural event, you have to get dressed up in some traditional clothing and get out there and kick your feet in the sand. It's appalling that in 2024, teachers are still caught up in that way of thinking of us in the past, not practicing culture now. They don't understand that culture, what the word means. I mean, how can you understand culture if you've never had culture?
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well because we've got to be really critical of the Australian curriculum as well, and a lot of the cross-curriculum priority looks at the ways in which Aboriginal people lived before colonisation, and so actually what that document is doing is is kind of reinforcing that idea that when colonisation occurred in 1788, Aboriginal culture ceased to exist. And then what we know now through some really incredible literature from people like Bruce Pascoe and Irene Watson and all the amazing stories from, people like you, Auntie Elaine, is that these that is a myth and a quite a successful lie, unfortunately. But actually, those practices, ways of looking after country, of practicing like ceremonies, of using tools, have all continued. Your tools might be created out of different things now, but they're the same. They have the same purpose. Even like looking at my earrings, like this is like a weaving that's a cultural like practice that is modern. That's happening now. Um, so
And
it is very interesting.
sorry, Nat, but in schools they used to get the teachers would come and say, Elaine, can you come and do Aboriginal art with the kids? Now, when they say, can you come and do Aboriginal art with the kids, that is actually their code for, can you come and do dot painting?
God. Yeah.
Yeah. That in itself tells you exactly what you're dealing with teachers. They're not educators. See, the difference between educators and Aboriginal people is we don't teach, we share, we pass on knowledge when it's time to be passed on. Teachers teach. They don't care if you understand it or not, they just teach. Where our ways, our traditional ways, was to pass knowledge on until you understood it. And then we could go to the next stage and we'd be sharing.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. We have this conversation a lot about Aboriginal artwork and that there is such a huge diversity in Aboriginal art, and that dot painting is something that comes from like one small place, I think in the Northern Territory, if I'm not mistaken, and that those practices haven't existed in South Australia. And again, like cultural expression through art is so much more than even painting. Like my earrings are artwork, weaving is artwork, painting is artwork. There's all kinds of different ways, like those beautiful like woven animals, I think that I've forgotten the jumpy weavers do. Like there's which is also that's not just weaving, that's also like a statue. Like there's carving, like anyway, there's I could talk about this for a long time because I obviously feel quite passionate about it too. I guess my final question then is what advice would you give to people working with children and young people who want to properly engage in sustainability, cultural work, sustainability work, and reconciliation? It's a big question, but I'm going to go there.
Ask the Aboriginal kids what they want to do, what they want to, Isn't that a good starting point?
It's an
Instead of
amazing starting point.
telling them what we're going to look at. I remember one kid in year 6, going back quite a few years, they were looking at Captain Cook in the classroom. 2022, they're still looking at Captain Cook. And this kid came from a fairly strong family, and he stood up and he goes, where is my family? Where am I reflected in this? We were here before Captain Cook. Why aren't you talking about us before Captain Cook? Why aren't you engaging with us? My mother would come into the school and talk to you guys, gladly support. But no, let's talk about Captain Cook.
Hmm. Um, what about you, Michael?
Yeah, drawing on what Arnie Elaine's shared and some of the reflections I had of some of Aboriginal young people said to me is draw on what they want to do, what they want to share, what they're interested in, their, their lens of inquiry, because there's a lot of young kids there who's got, some really great stories, experiences to share, especially when it comes to bush foods and plants or being out bush, and from what I've seen from this project as well, those other kids who might have not have had that opportunity to, they're learning and sharing, alongside each other as well, So I think that's a real, it comes down to creating, I'm not sure from an education sort of sector point of view, but in the health space, we talk about creating culturally safe environments. And so real big part of that is the physical environment, education, the pedagogy sort of environment. And the teachers as well, they're the ones driving it day in, day out. And what I said for the health sector point of view as well is that we need non-Aboriginal health professionals to get on the same page with us as well and contribute to cultural safety as well. And I think they'd have a really big role to play in that as well, working alongside Aboriginal staff within the schools, Aboriginal community families that engage in that school space. And just reminded me of what Arnie Elaine said, like, drawing on new ways to connect through culture as well is still, I think, something that we've explored in this project. And it's been, I think, hopefully a positive, we'll find out over the next few days, hopefully a positive outcome for Aboriginal young people, like, for example, I've been looking at a thing, but I don't know if you can see it, but bush tomato seeds, traditional, ways of going about it, but then also, can use little greenhouses, and new technology to do that too, to take control back of some of those plants, So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Sorry, Nat.
No, go ahead, please.
Bush tucker plants, it's not just food, it's medicine.
Mm.
They don't understand that. When I say that, you know who I'm talking about. Non-Aboriginal people don't understand that. Or they don't want to. How many teachers I've had say in my presence, I don't have to teach Aboriginal perspectives because I don't have any Aboriginal kids in my class. Now, in a wise world, you would think that person would be ashamed to even say something like that, because culture is not for just Aboriginal people, that the culture belongs on country. That's part of what Australia was and still is. We're all culturally connected to country and we all have our strengths. But yeah, sadly, the education department don't get it.
Yeah, it's no, go ahead, please.
I just want to say that's a good point, because that's similar to what we heard, going through the consultation up for this research project now, is that the Aboriginal young people and families will be the participants of the research project, but we deliver these activities to all the classes, to all the kids, so it's Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal kids, all there learning together about how to propagate a quandong seed, or cooking with wattle seed, making up a damper, that's something that they were really strong about, learning together. It's not just for the Aboriginal kids, yeah.
No, that is like such a good point, because I think there are a lot of people who are working in sites where they're quite monocultural, or where they won't have Aboriginal students, and that shouldn't be used as an excuse to not engage in reconciliation work, because, well, the first and most important thing is that we are on Aboriginal land. And so regardless of whether Aboriginal students are in our classrooms, we need to respect that the country is Aboriginal country. The other thing I think that's really important, though, is that every single person in that classroom, in that community, will meet and interact with and engage with Aboriginal people in their life. And in order to do that, you need to have built like an understanding and build your capacity to be in strong and reciprocal relationships with whoever that you're meeting with. And so that kind of excuse just doesn't fly with me. And also, the other thing I was going to say is I both agree so fully with your points around engaging young people in their decision making and giving them a voice in their own learning. But my other thing I would say that will set you know, sites up for success is like building relationships with Aboriginal elders, cultural knowledge holders, or traditional owners, or whoever you can kind of build like proper reciprocal two-way relationships with. That's also going to support you, because there's people that can come into your sites and give you really good knowledge about exactly what Arnie Elaine said. Bush food isn't just food, it's also medicine, and there are things that you may not even realize that you can do with food or how you can grow it. I went to an event, and a Ghana elder told me to put all the saltbush leaves in the oven just for a few minutes, and they go really crispy. I wouldn't have known. Well, he put it in a pot on an open fire, but I use an oven at home, and they like little chips, or like there's so many things that people use that are just like these kind of ways of doing things that you can share that knowledge in, and continue to share that with your students, with children that you're working with when they're not available in the site as well. And learn like the names for those things, like use the cultural names, use Ghana language if you're on Ghana country or wherever you might be. All of those things are so important, because language and like sustainability are interconnected with each other. Cultural sustainability is about culture like living on. I guess that what Arnie Lane said around inheritance of that culture and looking after it, that includes language. So that would be I'm just jumping on a little bit of extra advice. Ask your kids, but also if you don't have relationships already, start building them, start finding people who can do work within your site, because it will change the way that you are able to do this work. Any final thoughts before I finish up? We've got no questions from the meeting, so anything that you want to just finish up with, Annie Elaine?
Capacity. You know, everyone talks about, oh, we've got to do cultural awareness or cultural training. Nobody talks about the capacity to understand, to be involved. And that also includes the capacity to look at your own biases and how they prevent you from understanding and developing cultural awareness. You know, capacity. What is your capacity? I think that's quite people just come in and they get Aboriginal people to come in and do the cultural training, cultural awareness, cultural responsive, whatever they want to call it. But why don't we start by looking at the bottom of it, which is the capacity to understand, to learn, but to receive the information.
That's a really good point. Anything else that you wanted to add, Michael?
Something I love to share. Something I try to share with students, and yeah, I guess Annie lays at the freight, you know, the setting really well. Like, just if you come from a good place deep down, you know, morally, ethically, and then engagement, and you can, engage with it in the right way, engage with people, elders, traditional owners, whoever it might be. That's something that you can already work on yourself, and that self-reflection. That when you find yourself in that situation, it will hopefully put you in a good space to be ready for that two-way appropriate consultation, working alongside each other, whatever the sort of setting might be, and hopefully within the university space, we're setting up our future graduates to do that, I'd hope.
Yeah, I think those two things are very well linked, is like building that cultural capacity. And I guess the best way to build that is with that ethical, moral, open willingness to learn, empathy, And these are all very much things that are not academic. So things that are really like personal learning, which is, that's why we always talk about reconciliation work, as it's knowledge building, but it's also about understanding how you feel about this work, because that's where you learn. That's exactly what you said, Auntie Elaine. That's where you learn about things like your biases and who you are, so that you can kind of leave them at the door and be really open to learning new things.
Yeah, I've been doing welcomes. I did a welcome this morning.
Oh, nice.
I'm starting to see the no voters in the rooms. And it's disappointing because I go in there with an open heart to welcome them. But when I'm presenting, I see people not making eye contact with me, but not just not making eye contact with me, looking down at their hands or their phone, or there's no respect. And when I get that in welcomes, I come away and I think, yeah, probably a no voter. I mean, I could be wrong, but as I was driving home today, I thought, well, maybe I should talk about being respectful regardless of your views and your biases. Yeah, just like we never had a word for thank you in traditional language, because it was a community effort. We looked after each other, everybody understood their roles, everybody was respectful. But in a society we live in today, when I do welcomes and I can see the people that aren't receiving the welcome, it's disappointing, but you know what? I'll soldier on and I'll incorporate some little message in there just for them.
Hopefully I get to see one of those and see that little sneaky message.
And that's also the reason I bring that up is because that's also the attitude of some teachers in classrooms. You know, the Aboriginal kids are troublemakers. They're slow. They're not achieving. You know, but if they take them outside and let these kids grow and fill the air and the ground and the birds and the bugs, they'll get different outcomes.
Agree. I think that's a really nice point to kind of finish the webinar on. I thank you very much for your time, Auntie Elaine, and thank you very much for your time, Michael. I think that was a really worthwhile conversation to have. And I think that, if anything, I hope that from tonight's webinar that people understand that how all of these things are so interconnected, and that I noticed, Michael, that you said that you're not an educator, which but really, like that, I think that's what's important is having those overlapping types of roles that are working in education, because this sustainability is about looking after our environment, but it's also about looking after our kids, and it's about well-being as much as it is about connecting to culture, as much as it is about tasting good food. And I think that hopefully teachers and early learning educators can kind of look at this work and see that there's like a plethora of opportunities for learning within one small activity, and that it has benefits that are so amazing for the students that they're working with. So I thank you both so much for your time, and I thank everybody who made it for, staying after hours and hanging on with us. And yeah, that's our last webinar for 2024. I can finally put my feet up for a bit. So thanks, everyone.
I don't believe you, Nat. You never put your feet up.